So this is my 2005 CRF230F. I've had this bike for 2.5 years. It was my first dirt bike. And this is my review of it, or attempt at it. I'm not too familiar with this trail though, so my concentrations might not be great. But this is a trail bike. It's a very easygoing, carbureted bike. Power is very easy to handle, maybe about 20 horsepower. The stock suspension on it is very soft. So as I started getting into more technical riding, I did have to upgrade the suspension. I have an XR 250R front fork on it. Some big guns. And this suspension added about 1.5 inches of travel. The stock suspension has about 9 inches. So I'm up to about 10.5 front and rear. So the rear shock is Racing Brothers rear shock, which is fully adjustable. And yeah, I mean, you can make the rear feel really soft or really stiff. It's got a great amount of adjustability, and it's super comfy. I mean, very absorbs everything, controls the rear a lot better than the stock suspension. And this also raised the rear compared to a stock, or not the rear, raised the whole bike. So the bike is about 2 inches taller than it was. So especially on rocky trails, the stock suspension on this bike is not really rideable at any decent speed. You just have the rear bouncing all over the place, and you just lose traction. A lot of sandy hill climbs that I thought I couldn't do because of power limitations were really more of a traction limitation and suspension. With the better upgraded suspension, I can now get a lot more speed and absorb whoops on the way to sandy hill climbs, and with momentum get over a lot of them. Still not as much as on my WR250F, which is just better overall. Maybe not as comfortable or maneuverable in really tight situations, but so yeah. But the stock suspension on this bike, it's good to start, and it limits speeds. You know, you gotta take things slow because of the suspension limitations, which is good as a starter, or even an older rider who just wants to put around forest trails. It's a good option. The handling on the bike, it's very quick handling, very sharp. The wheelbase on this bike is shorter than a standard enduro or motocross bike. You know, those bikes typically have 57 inches or more, I think, of a wheelbase. This bike has about a 54-inch wheelbase, and even with the upgraded suspension, it stayed about the same. Oh, I also have a different linkage in the back. There's a small triangular shaped linkage in the back that I installed from CRF230F, I believe it is, and that raises the back to match. So the sharp handling that this bike has at lower speeds is also a con, I guess, if you're trying to do, you know, higher speed desert. Anything above 50 miles an hour or so, the bike starts feeling a little bit twitchy. I have had it at 60, 65 off-road and maybe 68 max on-road, at least the indicated speed. And so going back to the engine is super friendly, tractable. You know, it doesn't feel like you can grab too much power, but at the same time it's torquey. It's torquey. It feels like you can never stall it. I mean, obviously you can stall it, but seems to be a little single track here. Let's see where this goes. Whoa, this is crazy sandy. Not very traveled, are we? Oh shit. Ah! Braking on the bike is nice and progressive. It's got pretty smooth, easy to use brakes, but they're not very strong, which for off-road might be okay, for beginners might be okay. This is a neat little trench here that I didn't know about. So in general, the bike is very forgiving. The seat is like an old school enduro bike or trail bike seat. You know, the old Honda seats are they're wider, they're plusher than a lot of modern enduro bikes, so that's also nice. But it also feels like the bike was designed for sitting more. So if you're a taller rider, ergonomically you might have to make some changes. So I do have riser bars on here. And riser bars, and I do have larger foot pegs. But the foot pegs still feel like they're a little bit too far forward, so there are some kits to move them back, but then you got to get different levers, brake and shift levers, because the stock one's a little bit awkward at that point. So narrow action here. In desert whoops, you will bottom the suspension on the stock suspension, especially. So, you know, it's definitely not a hard enduro or desert race bike, but it's fun, it's easy to ride, keeps you out of trouble because it's manageable, and forces you to keep the speeds down due to its, you know, power and suspension limitations. And it's you know, super rock solid, reliable engine and transmission. These old air-cooled Hondas are very much overbuilt. You know, I checked the valve clearances, which I wouldn't be surprised if they had never been checked. And it's a 2005 bike, and I've put thousands of miles on it by now. So valves were in spec. Oil changes are fairly frequent, every 600 miles, or the oil changes, which is not too bad. I mean, if you're just doing these weekend trail rides, you can go for a while, a couple of months without an oil change. So, and it burns 0 oil. When I first bought it, I thought it was burning a little bit of oil because I would have to top it off, but there was a very easy to replace gasket on the, I don't know if it's like the cam cover, or yeah, I mean, you can view the cam chain through that cover on the side of the engine case, the side of the head, and that little gasket, I replaced it, a couple of dollars from Rocky Mountain ATV, and after that, 0 need to top off the oil. The clutch has been solid, no need to replace the clutch, so seems to be pretty durable. Initially I thought it was slipping, but I just adjusted the lever slightly and problem solved after that. So being air cooled, there's no radiator, right, to be concerned about as far as breaking a radiator when you fall. So that adds to the reliability as well.